If I ran into you on the street and asked you to name the first Simpsons game that comes to mind, I'm willing to bet that you wouldn't say The Simpsons Game. The Simpsons game that comes to my mind is The Simpsons Hit and Run, and apparently 79% of you would say the same because, let's be honest, it was a fantastic Simpsons game. However, The Simpsons Game, which released a few months after The Simpsons movie, sold more copies than The Simpsons Hit and Run, yet this Simpsons game didn't have nearly as much of a lasting impact as that Simpsons game, and I don't think it's hard to tell why. Simpsons Game.
I think it was called The Bus That Couldn't Slow Down.
It just doesn't play that well. It's one of those 3D platformers where you can Lost Viking style switch between characters, in this case Homer, Marge, Bart, and Lisa, and you use their unique abilities to jump over things, open paths, and take out enemies. Standard enough. The problem is, nothing feels too good. You're constantly fighting with the camera, aiming is finicky, some abilities awkwardly take 2 button presses to use for no rational reason, the movement speed is a bit slow, you can't rely on characters consistently grabbing ledges when they should, the punching is unresponsive and icky, and the puzzle design relies on you doing repetitive tasks over and over and scanning the area for missing pieces as if it were a hidden object game. Now, I've made it sound probably worse than it is, but it just suffers from being bland more than anything else, and it feels really dated even for 2007. Metacritic summed it up with lukewarm reviews at best, and apparently, after teasing this video a bit on my social media platforms, there are a handful of people out there who seem to passionately dislike it. But despite all of this, I kind of adore it, in ways that I never expected to. It's one of those games that you start out really iffy about, but as you go along it just wins you over, and while I won't spoil anything major in this video, I still found that part of the fun that I had with the game was through it surprising me with where it was going next. So if you're about to play this game yourself, I'd recommend doing so before watching the rest of this video. So while I liked the presentation that captured the look and feel of the show, the cutscenes that actually look and feel like the show, complete with all the voice actors returning, and the fever dream style, I mean, it literally opens in Homer's chocolate fetish dream. In the early stages, I just didn't really like how the whole game flowed because the story just didn't tie the levels together at all. It jumps between that chocolate dream level to a very standard nothingy level at the museum, to a fun level that sees Homer racing through an indoor theme park eating competition, and then a level where Lisa fights some loggers in the name of environmentalism. They aren't bad levels alone or on paper, and there's still some fun, inventive humor in them, but when a game plays as blandly as this, you need something more to string you along. Or at least I did. It's all footnoted by a hub-like open world, which I see gets a ton of praise online, and it is genuinely cool that you can traverse a surprisingly large rendition of Springfield that's probably the most detailed version of the town that video games have seen so far. It's clearly quite gorgeous too, but it's just very, very obvious to me that this is unfinished, or at least that they wanted to do a lot more with it. There's a lot of indoor areas like mows that you can enter and you can wander around in, which is great and satisfies a curiosity, but there's just nothing more to do in them, and there's no real reason to enter them beyond curiosity and collectibles. Pedestrians of the town slowly wander around and say a line when you walk past, which can be quite funny, but that's the only breath of life that the town is afforded. There's no cars driving around, there's no music, and there's just a general feeling of emptiness and loneliness to it. It's quite eerie. I'm gonna stop talking for a second and just let you listen to the game and give you a sense of how ghostly it really is. It just feels off, like you can sense it, and I'm mostly annoyed at this because it's so gorgeously put together that it ends up being a waste of potential. Thankfully though, the occasional level that is set in the town uses it really nicely, including the next one where you're introduced to Marge's abilities. Along with the usual platforming, Marge can use Maggie to go through vents, and more importantly, she can essentially use her megaphone to slowly draw in a mob of pedestrians, which she can command to attack enemies and destroy or build context-sensitive things, and this is the level where the game really began to win me over. The setup is Quimby and the video game executive behind the latest Grand Theft Scratchy game, you heard what I said, are cozying up together to promote the game around town, and Marge wants to stop this and ban the game because it's making all the kids violent. If you remember the mid-2000s, this was a really hot topic. I love this because a lot of the humor is created by the irony behind rounding up a violent mob to stop violent video games, and I love how it lets you amass so many angry townsfolk that you end up having a small army by the end of the level. I particularly love the ending though, where EA, who were behind both the Simpsons game in real life and Grand Theft Scratchy in the in-game universe, had a moment of self-awareness and wrote themselves into the game with the sleazy executive character. It's just brilliant, and I think it's probably even funnier nowadays, now that EA is the worst company of all time or something.
So I'm ready to receive my bribe now. Oh baby, the $sign doesn't lie.
From this point forwards, the game leans a lot heavier into being a game about video games. Up until now, it made light jokes about how the Simpsons were living in a game, and the achievements are called game cliches for stuff like double jumps and invisible barriers, but past this point, the game transforms into something that's part video game parody and part video game love letter. The next level has you going through Dr. Frink's portal straight into the game engine, which is amusing in itself, and despite the generic factory cross-sewer look of the level, it is dripping with character. Iconic video game characters are seen throughout, starting with Mario and Sonic, who are depicted pretty depressingly. Gotta go faster than that. The enemies are all meatheady Madden footballers, like literally from the game Madden, or Rue from Street Fighter, and there's posters on the walls of knockoff video games like Need for Speedo, Metal Gear Soiled, and Mortal Kombat. One of the rooms you enter is called the Blood Room, which is filled excessively with blood, as Bart and Lisa joke about why there is just so much blood in video games.
Yes, the Blood Room! Oh, it's all so carnal and unnecessary!
It's all very on the nose, but it's just hard not to smile at it all. After some fun levels battling aliens and dolphins and the Lard Lad Donut guy as a boss battle, the Simpsons get sucked back into the game engine, where you meet none other than Will Wright.
Dad, that's Will Wright, designer of SimCity and The Sims!
I was comfortably warming up to the game up until this point, but this cameo and this level is really where the game straight up won me over. Will Wright plays himself as an evil super nerd who's so upset with the failure of his game Sim Sandwich that he's banished himself to the game engine and started destroying old video games, so you must save them from their fiery demise. Will Wright as an evil maniacal villain taunting the players with lines like this,
"Anything without Sim in its name is stupid, except sport,"
is just brilliant. He's great as a maniacal game designing supervillain. It's a real treat to see.
Oh my god, it's a nerd!
That's right, the nerdiest nerd in the computerverse.
The final act has you going inside of 4 different video games to collect keycards, which allows you to find the game's creator. One of the 4 games is aptly named NeverQuest, which mostly consists of some fun Lord of the Rings jokes where Rod, Todd and Ralph play the hobbits that follow Marge around. Medal of Homer is a tasteful retelling of the events of the Second World War starring Abe Simpson and Mr. Burns. Then there's Big Super Happy Fun Game, which is just overly Japanese, complete with Mr. Sparkle and Milhouse playing the king from Katamari Damacy. It's just amazing. I particularly liked how you got to go inside of Grand Theft Scratchy as Marge and essentially rebuild and gentrify Grove Street. There's just so much great stuff packed into these levels that I'm kind of holding myself from delving too far into them as much as I'd love to, because explaining jokes is no fun and I don't want to spoil everything for those who haven't played this yet. And on that thought, I'm not going to talk about the ending of the game at all. I'll just say that it's fantastic and it's worth playing the game all the way through. From start to finish, the Simpsons game just seems to get better and better. Now I know a decent handful of you will be watching this and just thinking that it's a little, and I'm about to use the most YouTuber word ever here, cringy. The humor definitely feels much more in line with the latest Simpsons seasons here, which is never as good. The EA influence can be felt throughout, and it is a bit self-congratulatory, and just in general, a lot of jokes about video games can come off as a bit like, you know, like Red Letter Media-esque, like, look at our reference, we referenced a thing, notice it, pop culture, and while there is like a lot of that, and I mean like a lot of that here, the humor mostly goes beyond that, so it actually lands quite well. And more importantly, video games as a whole, like just the medium and history of video games, is approached with a certain innocent, genuine love here that elevates the writing beyond just surface level jokes. Not only is preserving old video games important to The Simpsons, and in turn to the writers behind the game, and not only is the game consistently joking about video games in a good-natured way, but every now and then the game will just switch up the gameplay a bit and play like an old arcade game. At one point you're suddenly playing Space Invaders, at another point Mission Control, or Joust, or Gauntlet. In the Japanese level it even turns into a Pokemon battle. You just get the sense that this whole game was made by a bunch of video game loving, arcade dwelling geeks, and it is just delightful. It was actually made by EA Redwood Shores, who are the developers behind some absolutely solid 007 Lord of the Rings and Tiger Woods games, as well as the very enjoyable Godfather games, the first of which we've looked at on the channel before. This game seems to run on the same engine as The Godfather, so it has the same explosions, which are really the only part of the game that visually look out of place. It's kind of interesting. Redwood would rename themselves to the more well-known Visceral Games and make Dead Space, and now they themselves are a Dead Space. It's definitely not surprising that this game turned out well, considering their track record. So even with some gameplay that never quite clicks that you'll need to put up with from start to finish, even with a very slow start and some iffy pacing, even with a wasted open world, and even with a general jankiness to the entire game, if this game sounds at all appealing to you, you should absolutely give it a go. And hey, if the gameplay is too bland, you can play through pretty much the entire thing in 2-player split screen, which as usual goes a long way to mask a lot of the gameplay flaws, even if the mode does feel a bit thrown in. I was so pleasantly surprised by The Simpsons Game, and I think that you will be too.
No video game is safe from an industry that's always chasing the hot new thing. Sure, The Simpsons Game is great with its unique upgradable character abilities and its hilarious self-referential cutscenes. But what about when the Xbox 720 comes out or the PlayStation 4? No one will want to play as then.
And with that, we wrap up the Simpsons Game review. I hope you enjoyed it. If you enjoyed it, I'd like you to click like or subscribe or comment, because that kind of helps out the algorithm and all that. And I played the PS3 version of the game, which is, alongside the 360 version of the game, considered to be the best, but the game also came out on PS2, Wii, PSP, and DS. And aside from the DS, the other 3 versions that I just mentioned are kind of similar to the version I just played, but they don't have the open world, and there's just some minor differences. So like the Wii version, for example, there's some Wiimote waggling moments, because of course there is. But so if you want to play like what's considered to be the best version of the game, play the PS3 or 360, but if you can't play either of those, the PSP, the PS2, or the Wii version are also considered to be quite good. And then there's also the DS version, which is, as far as I know, completely different. It's made by Kryptonite Games, just a different developer, plays completely differently. I haven't seen much of it. I vaguely remember playing it like back when it was new, which is interesting, but might be worth covering. Leave a comment if you'd like to see that. And now I'd like to thank all my patrons, including but not limited to the ones appearing on the screen right now, and especially including Adam Beals, Analog Man, Boggy Online, Brighton Robinson, Caden the Dingo, Devin Grandal, Dominic Chakotay, Evil Chicken, Gary Pay, Casey, Labcat Lethrington, Lucas Ray Sevic, Matthias Bayes, Maximilian Kunzman, May Aris Mazaki, Melanie G, Minimme secretly misses the Disney plane meme and is sad now, Mustache Duct Tape, Mrs. Minimme, OK Got Food Sunny, Peaceful Kumquat, Plague, Ritalin for Kids, Test Drive Unlimited 2, The Mighty Mega Link, This is a Test of the Emergency Broadcast System, Thomas Damsgaard, Tommy Carver Chaplin, Trapalaw Ross, Trixie Emerson, Under 10 Hours, Writing on Games, and Zindictive. Patreon allows this show to happen, or helps this show happen. It's really, really nice to have this kind of fallback income with Patreon, so I appreciate it so much. And I hope you all have a wonderful weekend, or whatever time it is for you now, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye.